The 2022 Conservative Party of Canada leadership election was a leadership election held by the Conservative Party of Canada to elect the successor to Erin O'Toole. He was removed on February 2, 2022, as leader by the party's caucus in the House of Commons of Canada by a vote of 73-45. Candice Bergen was chosen as interim party leader and served until a permanent leader was elected. 5 candidates were running for the position, including former Cabinet Minister and Member of Parliament Pierre Poilievre, former Cabinet Minister, former leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, and former Quebec Premier Jean Charest, Member of Parliament Leslyn Lewis, Member of Parliament Scott Aitchison, and former Ontario Member of Provincial Parliament Roman Baber. Former Member of Parliament, former leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, and Brampton, Ontario Mayor Patrick Brown also ran for the position, but was disqualified in early July due to his campaign's alleged violations of the financial provisions of the Canada Elections Act. On September 10, it was announced that Poilievre won the leadership on the first ballot. This was the first leadership election since 2004 which resulted in a first ballot victory. Early life. Poilievre was born on June 3, 1979, in Calgary, Alberta, to a biological mother who was 16 years old and of Irish-Canadian descent on her father's side. Poilievre was adopted by school teachers Marlene and Donald Poilievre, who is French-Canadian, shortly after being born. Poilievre was raised in a modest household in suburban Calgary. He played ice hockey and went on camping trips with his younger brother Patrick, who was also adopted from their biological mother by Marlene and Donald. Growing up, Poilievre worked as a paperboy for the Calgary Sunday. Poilievre also attended Henry Wisewood High School. He was on a wrestling team until he was forced to stop due to a temporary shoulder tendonitis injury, at the age of 14. Following the injury, Poilievre attended an Alberta Tory Riding Association meeting as a new hobby. As a result, he became interested in politics and started reading political books, including Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom, a book that greatly influenced his politics. He became active in the Reform Party and the Progressive Conservative Association of Alberta by participating in meetings of both parties. At the age of 16, Poilievre sold Reform Party memberships for Jason Kenney and also did telephone canvassing for him. He also knocked on doors for political campaigns and served on a riding association. Shortly after turning 17 years old, Poilievre was a delegate to the Reform Party 1996 National Convention in Vancouver, British Columbia. Poilievre's parents, Marlene and Donald, who had previously married in 1971, separated when he was in his mid-teens. Donald later came out as a gay man. As an older teenager, Poilievre had a job at TELUS doing corporate collections by calling businesses. He also later worked briefly as a journalist for Alberta Report, a conservative weekly magazine. At the University of Calgary, Poilievre studied international relations, following a period of study in commerce. He left university without graduating, but would later return to graduate with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 2008. As a second-year student, in 1999, Poilievre submitted an essay to Magna Internationals as Prime Minister, I Would. Essay Contest. His essay, titled Building Canada Through Freedom, focused on the subject of individual freedom and, among other things, argued for a 2-term limit for all members of Parliament. As a finalist, Poilievre won $10,000 and won a 4-month internship at Magna, with the essay being published in the book that collected the essays titled At Stake as Prime Minister, I Would. Poilievre was also the president of the Young Tories at the University of Calgary, a club composed of both progressive conservative and reform members, where he clashed with Patrick Brown, who was the president of the National Progressive Conservative Youth Federation at the time. Their dispute was over Progressive Conservative leader Joe Clark, Poilievre considered Clark to be anti-youth. Concerned that anti-Clark youth members such as himself would be removed, as Brown was an executive for the Progressive Conservatives, Poilievre threatened to shift the Progressive Conservative Club to the United Alternative. Media outlets had obtained a leaked memo of Brown planning to remove anti-Clark youth leaders, but Brown would deny it, leading Poilievre to back down from his threat. At the age of 19, Poilievre staged a protest against a student union that tried to prevent Campus Reform Party supporters from campaigning for their candidate in an Alberta Senate election. According to the Globe and Mail, Poilievre was among the reformers on Alberta campuses pushing rock-ribbed, ideological conservatism. In his early 20s, Poilievre eventually met both his biological mother and his maternal grandfather. In 2002, Poilievre left Calgary and university to work for Alberta Treasurer Stockwell Day's leadership campaign of the Canadian Alliance, having been part of an organization seeking to recruit him. After Day's tenure as leader of the official opposition, Poilievre worked for Day as an advisor. After Jean Chrétien announced he would retire as Prime Minister of Canada in 2002, Poilievre and Ezra Levant, who practiced law at the time, wrote an op-ed advocating for the merger of the Canadian Alliance and the Progressive Conservative parties. When Levant was campaigning to replace Preston Manning in 2002 Calgary Southwest by-election, Poilievre was his campaign spokesperson until Levant withdrew in order to allow Stephen Harper to run. Before moving to Ottawa, Ontario, Poilievre founded a company called 3D Contact Incorporated in 2003, with his partner Jonathan Dennis, who would become Alberta Cabinet Minister years later. Their company focused on providing political communications, polling and research services. Political career. Early political career. With preparations being made for the 2004 Canadian federal election, the 24-year-old Manordale resident Poilievre won the Conservative Party nomination in the riding of Nepean-Carleton to contest incumbent David Pratt of the Liberal Party of Canada. Though Pratt was a two-term incumbent and cabinet minister, the election was projected to be close between the two. Poilievre was given the nickname Skippy early in his political career. Poilievre won his riding and his Conservative Party formed the official opposition to a Liberal Party minority government. Poilievre entered the 38th Canadian Parliament at the age of 25 along with Andrew Scheer as the youngest members of the Conservative caucus. Poilievre took up the cause of the Queensway Carleton Hospital, which was in the midst of an expansion project while facing provincial funding reductions for operations and an increase in rent as its lease with the National Capital Commission was set to expire in 2013. Seeking to eliminate the rent the hospital paid, Poilievre introduced, on June 20, 2005, a private member Bill C-414, titled An Act to Prevent the Government of Canada from Charging Rent to Non-Profit Hospitals. The bill was defeated in a vote of 165-111, but with Nepean-Carleton MPP John Baird they advocated the hospital only pay a $1 per year rent and implemented that once Baird became president of the Treasury Board the next year. Poilievre also sponsored private member Bill C-383, introduced on May 11, 2005, to create a means to recall members of Parliament through a petition, and Bill C-456, on November 24, 2005, to insert parental responsibility into the criminal code by making it an offence for a parent to contribute through negligence, inappropriate action, or lack of appropriate action to behaviour that results in their child committing an offence. Poilievre also voiced opposition to the appointment of Michael Jean as the Governor-General of Canada by taking an issue with Jean's past support of Quebec sovereignty movement. Poilievre took out a petition asking the Queen of Canada to dismiss Jean's appointment. After the passing of Queen Elizabeth II in 2022, Jean revealed that the Queen dismissed Poilievre's petition over the Queen's belief that she cannot intervene in Canadian affairs. In government. Cabinet Minister. Minister of State for Democratic Reform. Minister of Employment and Social Development. Opposition MP and Shadow Minister. Locally, Nepean was carved out of his riding in the 2012 Canadian federal electoral redistribution, so Poilievre moved from Barrhaven to Greeley to seek election in the more rural Carleton riding. Poilievre narrowly won the seat with 46% of the vote, but the Conservative Party would only win enough seats to form the official opposition to a Liberal Party majority government. Following Harper's resignation, interim party leader Rona Ambrose made Poilievre the Conservative Party critic on issues relating to the Treasury Board until October 2016, when she moved him to critic on issues relating to employment, labor, and work opportunity. In August 2017, new party leader Andrew Scheer selected Poilievre to be critic of the Minister of Finance, with Tom Kamik as deputy critic. In that role, Poilievre introduced his third private member's bill, which sought to amend the Federal Provincial Arrangements Act in such a way that it would eliminate personal income taxes and payroll taxes that apply to persons with disabilities. Though it gained the support of the New Democratic Party, the bill was defeated at consider of second reading, with both the Liberal Party and Bloc Québécois/Quebec Débout voting against. During this parliament, Poilievre travelled to Dieppe as part of a Canadian delegation to commemorate the 75th anniversary ceremonies of the Dieppe raid. In the lead-up to the next election, Poilievre used all the House of Commons time allotted for debating the 2019 Canadian federal budget to deliver one 4-day-long speech to promote the Essentiel-Lavalin affair. Poilievre was again re-elected in 2019, this time by a wider margin of the vote compared to his 2015 victory. After Scheer's resignation as party leader, Poilievre was initially considered to be one of the front-runners to win the subsequent leadership election. Poilievre considered a bid and started to assemble a campaign team, though he announced he would not run on January 23, 2020, citing family reasons. Scheer's successor, Erin O'Toole, kept Poilievre as finance critic until February 10, 2021, when he was replaced with Ed Fast. Poilievre then became critic for jobs and industry, though he only held this position for a short time as he regained his old position as finance critic on November 9, 2021. Poilievre won re-election in Carleton in the 2021 federal election. 2022 leadership campaign. Opposition leader. On September 12, Poilievre gave his first speech to his caucus as leader. The following day, on September 13, Poilievre unveiled his House of Commons leadership team with 9 members, including deputy leaders Melissa Lantsman and Tim Uppal. On October 6, it was reported that between 2018 and 2022, Poilievre's team-managed YouTube channel posted hundreds of videos with a hidden tag labeled MGTOW, referencing the misogynistic online community. Poilievre condemned MGTOW, said he was unaware of the tags, and had his team immediately remove the tags. On October 12, Poilievre unveiled a 71-member shadow cabinet, including candidate rivals Leslyn Lewis and Scott Aitchison. Political positions. Poilievre has described himself as a true conservative, while some journalists have also described him as libertarian and populist. However, many journalists have also dismissed the populist label due to Poilievre's pro-choice, pro-immigration, and pro-same-sex marriage positions. Economic policy. Poilievre argues that large budget deficits are the reason for inflation. Poilievre proposes implementing a pay-as-you-go law, requiring the government to offset any new spending with a cut elsewhere. Poilievre supports normalizing cryptocurrencies including Bitcoin, which he believes is an inflation hedge. He stated he wants to make Canada the blockchain capital of the world and believes the federal government is ruining the Canadian dollar. Poilievre has criticized the Bank of Canada, accusing it of being financially illiterate for forecasting that there would be deflation as opposed to inflation, to which the bank's deputy governor Paul Beaudry responded by stating, "The aspect that we should be held accountable is exactly right." Poilievre has said that the bank's governor, Tiff Macklem, is Liberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's personal ATM in terms of printing money to fund deficit spending for the COVID-19 pandemic. Poilievre stated that a government led by him would dismiss Macklem, audit the bank, and ban the bank's potential digital currency. Poilievre supports defunding the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, claiming the government could save $1 billion by doing so. He proposes to convert the CBC's headquarters into affordable housing and other federal buildings into condominium housing. Housing and infrastructure. Poilievre blames bureaucracy for a lack of new housing, and proposes requiring severely unaffordable cities to increase their amount of new homes built by 15%, in order to continue receiving federal infrastructure money. He also proposes compensating other cities for building extra housing. Poilievre also plans to sell off 15% of the government's 37,000 buildings he considers to be underutilized, so that they can be converted into affordable housing instead. Poilievre stated that a government led by him would permit a runway expansion at Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport, allowing jets to fly in and out of the airport. Poilievre cited increased competition in the aviation industry and travellers being provided with an alternative to Toronto's Pearson International Airport, which had dealt with congestion and flight delays surpassing 50% around the month of July 2022. Environment and energy. Poilievre is in favour of addressing climate change by using green technology and placing targets to reduce carbon-related emissions, opposed to using taxes. One of the technologies he plans to incentivize is carbon capture and storage. Poilievre also plans to increase the production of electric cars by greenlighting more mining of lithium, cobalt, and copper required to produce the cars and batteries. Poilievre believes Canadian energy is cleaner than that of other countries, and proposes a ban on importing foreign oil and a review of all pipeline projects cancelled by the current government. Poilievre pledges to repeal the Liberal government's carbon tax if the Conservatives form government under him. Poilievre also favours repealing two bills that he describes as anti-energy, Bill C-48 and Bill C-69. Foreign policy. During the spring and summer of 2020, Poilievre was critical of what he perceived as the Trudeau government's misplaced trust in the Communist Party of China, who cancelled the CanSino vaccine contract with Canada. Poilievre insisted that Canada should create its own vaccines supply, and make purchase agreements with more trustworthy governments. In response to the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, Poilievre stated that a government led by him would support Ukraine by bringing in more Ukrainian refugees, providing more weapons to aid to Ukraine, and by supplying Europe with Canada's energy and oil to help reduce Europe's dependency on energy from Russia. Poilievre disagrees with putting a no-fly zone on Ukraine because he does not want to escalate Canada going to war. Poilievre said that a government led by him would ban his cabinet ministers from participating in the World Economic Forum, stating that the forum is against the interests of our people. Social issues. Poilievre supports abortion rights. He stated that government led by him would not introduce and would not pass any legislation restricting access to abortion, though he would allow his caucus to have free votes on legislation. In 2010, however, he supported a bill that would have criminalized pressuring getting an abortion in a motion where Parliament would have studied when a fetus should be considered a human. In 2020, he changed his position and claimed that a government led by him would never introduce a bill on the topic and no private ones would be adopted. In 2021, Poilievre opposed a private member bill prohibiting sex-selective abortion. Poilievre supports same-sex marriage. In a 2020 interview, he called it a success and stated, "I voted against it 15 years ago. But I learned a lot." In 2005, he gave a speech opposing same-sex marriage while favoring civil unions as an alternative and voted in favor on the motion to introduce legislation to reinstate an opposite-sex-only definition of marriage in 2006. He had also requested Finance Minister Jim Flaherty withhold money spent on sex reassignment surgery from Canada Health transfer payments. In 2021, Poilievre voted in favor of banning conversion therapy in a free vote. Poilievre opposes the decriminalization of hard drugs, arguing that it is not compassionate. He advocated for treatment and recovery for those suffering from addictions which are deadly, and that drug dealers should be facing strong policing and tough sentences. Poilievre stated that he is in favor of freedom of speech and seeks to repeal Bill C-11 and the successor to Bill C-36, describing them as censorship in Canada. Poilievre stated a government led by him would scrap direct federal research and other grants to universities if they do not commit to Section 2 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which protects freedom of expression. Poilievre also stated he would appoint a free speech guardian that would ensure compliance to Section 2, investigate claims of academic censorship, report to the federal government on the universities that refuse to uphold the charter right, and recommend cuts to direct federal grants to universities that do not uphold the right. Poilievre announced his support of those in the Canada Convoy protest who were protesting peacefully, while denouncing the individuals who were promoting extremism. Poilievre believes that the federal government abused its power by invoking the Emergencies Act during the convoy protests and proposes limiting its power to prevent it from being used similarly in the future. Immigration. Poilievre describes himself as pro-immigration and seeks to put forward policies aiming to speed up processing times for immigration to reunite families, keep refugees safe, and get jobs filled in Canada. Poilievre stated that a government led by him would negotiate agreements with provinces to license qualified professionals within 60 days of receiving applications, provide study loans to aid new immigrants in passing examinations, and permit immigrants to receive licenses before moving to Canada. Healthcare. Poilievre plans to address healthcare shortages in Canada by ensuring provinces expedite the approval of professional credentials of certified immigrants to increase the number of healthcare providers, such as nurses. In 2022, Poilievre introduced Private Members Bill C-377, Prevention of Government-Imposed Vaccination Mandates Act, which would end federally enforced COVID-19 related vaccine mandates. In October 2022, Poilievre voted in support of a Conservative Private Members Bill to change the Criminal Code, prohibiting the act of coercing health professionals to euthanize patients in medical assistance in dying, with the aim of upholding freedom of conscience and Section 2 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The bill was defeated when all Liberal, NDP and Bloc members voted against it. Firearms. Poilievre opposes re-establishing the Long Gun Registry, and opposes the May 1, 2020, order in Council that banned over 1,500 models of firearms. Poilievre believes the solution to gun violence in Canada is stronger policing of gun smuggling, opposed to placing further restrictions on licensed firearms owners and sports shooters.